The daily ritual of morning coffee is deeply woven into the fabric of modern human existence, serving as both a psychological anchor and a physiological catalyst that signals the start of a new day. Yet for the aging population, this seemingly innocuous, universally celebrated habit conceals a profound biomechanical threat to the structural integrity of the human spine. To fully grasp the magnitude of this hidden crisis, it is imperative to embark upon a microscopic and macroscopic exploration of the vertebral column, a biological masterpiece that relies heavily on delicate, deeply interconnected fluid dynamics to defy the relentless downward pull of gravity and facilitate human locomotion. The human spine is comprised of individual vertebral bones separated by specialized cartilaginous cushions known as intervertebral discs, which function not merely as static structural spacers, but as highly dynamic, fluid-filled shock absorbers that must constantly adapt to fluctuating mechanical stresses. At the anatomical core of each intervertebral disc lies the nucleus pulposus, a highly viscous, jelly-like substance composed predominantly of water and exceptionally large proteoglycan molecules, specifically agrecan, which is heavily populated with water-binding glycosaminoglycans like chondroitin sulfate and keratin sulfate. These negatively charged molecules exert a powerful osmotic force known as the Donin swelling pressure, pulling water into the center of the disc to maintain internal hydrostatic pressure, an environment that is securely encapsulated by the annulus fibrosus, a tough, multi-layered exterior composed of concentric, tightly woven type 1 collagen fibers. Because the intervertebral disc is the largest avascular structure in the human body, meaning it is entirely devoid of direct blood vessels, its cellular survival, nutritional intake, and mechanical hydration depend exclusively upon a highly precarious physiological process known as imbibition. Imbibition is a sophisticated form of osmotic diffusion driven by diurnal mechanical pressure gradients and, most importantly, the availability of properly balanced extracellular fluids within the surrounding capillary beds of the vertebral end plates. During the course of a normal night of horizontal sleep, the removal of axial gravitational loading allows the intervertebral discs to decompress, unleashing the osmotic potential of the glycosaminoglycans to voraciously absorb water from surrounding tissues, causing the discs to swell, increase in height, and fully pressurized by the time the individual awakens. This morning state of maximal hydration is a double-edged sword for the aging spine, as the fully swollen disc experiences its highest internal hydrostatic pressures of the day, rendering the annulus fibrosus exceptionally taut and incredibly vulnerable to extreme bending or twisting forces before the body has had the opportunity to gradually equilibrate to upright mechanical loading. It is precisely within this delicate, highly vulnerable window of early morning spinal biomechanics that the introduction of a potent pharmacological agent like caffeine can initiate a catastrophic cascade of physiological events, fundamentally altering systemic fluid balance and directly compromising the biomechanical resilience of the spinal column. When an elderly individual awakens and immediately consumes a cup of caffeinated coffee, they are introducing a powerful, rapidly absorbed trimethylxanthine alkaloid into an already fasting, functionally dehydrated biological system that has not received fluid intake for the past 7 to 8 hours. As the hot, dark liquid cascades down the esophagus and enters the highly permeable environment of the stomach and small intestine, the caffeine molecules are swiftly absorbed into the portal venous circulation and transported directly to the liver, where the cytochrome P450 enzyme system, specifically CYP1A2, begins the process of metabolizing the compound into its primary paraxanthin, theobromine, and theophylline derivatives. Within mere minutes of consumption, caffeine permeates the systemic bloodstream and easily crosses the blood-brain barrier to exert its famously desired stimulant effects by competitively antagonizing adenosine receptors in the central nervous system, thereby blocking the brain's natural fatigue signals and triggering a sympathetic nervous system arousal that artificially elevates heart rate, blood pressure, and mental alertness. However, This same systemic circulation inevitably delivers the high concentration of caffeine to the renal arteries, carrying the compound directly into the intricate filtering networks of the kidneys, where the true danger to the spinal discs begins to unfold on a microscopic scale. The kidneys, functioning as the master regulators of the body's fluid and electrolyte homeostasis, process systemic blood plasma through millions of microscopic functional units called nephrons, which utilize the glomerulus, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, and distal structures to meticulously filter metabolic waste while carefully reabsorbing vital water and essential minerals back into the bloodstream. Caffeine fundamentally disrupts this elegant homeostatic mechanism by exerting a pronounced, localized diuretic effect through several concurrent pharmacological pathways. Primarily, caffeine increases the glomerular filtration rate by dilating the afferent arterioles leading into the nephron, forcing a higher volume of blood plasma through the renal filtration system at an accelerated velocity, thereby overwhelming the tubule's capacity to properly reabsorb fluid. Simultaneously, caffeine actively inhibits the reabsorption of sodium ions within the proximal convoluted tubule and the proximal portion of the loop of Henle, effectively trapping these osmotically active sodium molecules within the newly forming urine. Because water inherently follows the concentration gradient of sodium through the process of osmosis, the trapped sodium forces an excessive volume of water to be excreted alongside it, while caffeine further compounds this profound fluid loss by mildly suppressing the release and efficacy of arginine vasopressin, commonly known as antidiuretic hormone, which normally instructs the collecting ducts to open aquaporin channels and salvage water back into the body. The immediate result of this chemically induced renal cascade is a sudden, significant increase in urine production and subsequent excretion, a phenomenon that aggressively depletes the body's circulating blood plasma volume at the exact moment when the aging physiology requires gentle rehydration after a long night of sleep. As the plasma volume drops, the systemic blood becomes increasingly hypertonic, meaning the concentration of circulating solutes such as proteins, glucose, and remaining cellular debris rises relative to the diminished volume of water, thereby dramatically altering the body's overall systemic osmolarity. The human body, an organism intrinsically driven by the relentless pursuit of homeostasis, perceives this rising blood osmolarity as a state of acute cellular threat, prompting the extracellular fluid matrix to desperately scavenge available water from any surrounding biological tissues in order to dilute the hypertonic blood and restore a safe, life-sustaining osmotic equilibrium. Because the human survival hierarchy prioritizes the fluid requirements of the brain, heart, and vital organs above all other structures, the dense, seemingly inert connective tissues of the musculoskeletal system, including the intervertebral discs, are instantly identified as expendable reservoirs of water to be drawn upon during this caffeine-induced systemic drought. It is here that the critical avascular nature of the spinal discs becomes their greatest anatomical liability. The nucleus pulposus depends entirely on a favorable, positive concentration gradient from the surrounding capillary beds of the vertebral end plates to maintain its fluid volume. But when the systemic blood supply becomes hypertonic due to coffee consumption, the osmotic gradient is violently reversed. Instead of water gently diffusing into the disc to sustain its turgidity and health, the hyperosmolar environment outside the disc exerts a powerful, unrelenting osmotic pull that literally leaches the essential, life-sustaining fluid backward out of the highly pressurized nucleus pulposus, forcing the water to seep through the semi-permeable cartilaginous end plates and return to the systemic circulation. This rapid, insidious biochemical theft of water from the spinal discs triggers a devastating chain reaction of mechanical failures that profoundly alters the biomechanical load distribution across the entire vertebral column, an effect that is exponentially magnified in the already compromised, degenerating spine of an elderly individual. To map the biomechanical stress of this dehydration, one must envision the intervertebral disc operating under the fundamental laws of fluid dynamics, and Pascal's principle, which dictates that pressure applied to an enclosed fluid is transmitted undiminished to every portion of the fluid and the walls of its containing vessel. In a properly hydrated disc, the downward mechanical forces of gravity, muscular contraction, and body weight are absorbed by the water-dense nucleus pulposus, which elegantly converts these massive vertical compressive loads into horizontal outward tension, uniformly stretching the resilient, elastic collagen fibers of the surrounding annulus fibrosus, effectively dissipating the shock and preserving the delicate neurological structures housed within the spinal canal. However, when the caffeine diuretic effect strips the nucleus pulposus of its vital water content, the core loses its essential hydrostatic pressure, causing the central jelly-like substance to depressurize, flatten, and functionally collapse under the weight of the torso, entirely destroying the disc's primary mechanism of shock absorption. Without the pressurized fluid core to bear the vertical load, the immense compressive forces of gravity bypass the nucleus pulposus entirely and are transferred directly downward onto the outermost layers of the annulus fibrosus, a structure that was evolutionarily designed only to withstand horizontal stretching, not vertical compression. This pathological shifting of mechanical weight causes the concentric collagen rings of the annulus to buckle, bulge outward, and experience extreme, localized shear stresses that their aging fibers can no longer endure. Over time, and often within the span of a single morning routine, this abnormal compression produces microscopic tears within the lamellae of the annulus fibrosus, triggering a highly localized, inflammatory cascade as the body attempts to repair the damaged structural tissue. Simultaneously, the loss of vertical height in the dehydrated intervertebral disc severely disrupts the intricate spatial geometry of the entire spinal segment, initiating secondary mechanical consequences that radiate deeply into the surrounding anatomical structures. As the disc space narrows due to the loss of fluid, the facet joints, which are the small, paired, cartilage-lined synovial joints located at the posterior aspect of each vertebra that guide and limit spinal movement, are forced to bear an abnormal, heavily increased proportion of the body's vertical weight. These delicate joints, which typically only carry about 20% of the spinal load in a healthy, upright posture, are suddenly subjected to severe, grinding compressive forces as the vertebrae physically settle closer together, causing the highly innervated articular cartilage to wear away at an accelerated rate, eventually leading to painful bone-on-bone friction and the formation of reactive bone spurs known as osteophytes. This biomechanical collapse creates a perfect storm for acute and chronic nociception, effectively explaining why so many elderly individuals experience a profound, often debilitating exacerbation of their lower back and neck pain within hours of waking up and consuming their morning coffee. The nociceptive pathways, the sensory nervous system's response to certain harmful or potentially harmful stimuli, are heavily activated as the bulging annulus fibrosus physically encroaches upon the highly sensitive sinovertebral nerves that innervate the outer layers of the disc, transmitting deep, aching, diffuse pain signals directly into the dorsal root ganglion and up through the spinothalamic tract to the somatosensory cortex of the brain. Furthermore, if the disc loses sufficient height, the neural foramina, the bony exit windows through which the delicate spinal nerve roots travel to reach the extremities, become mechanically narrowed, a condition known as foraminal stenosis. The slightest further dehydration and subsequent bulging of the disc can then physically impinge upon these exiting nerve roots, generating severe radicular pain, commonly recognized as sciatica, characterized by sharp, electric, burning sensations that shoot down the legs or arms, accompanied by potential numbness, tingling, and debilitating muscle weakness that significantly impairs the individual's ability to walk, stand, or perform basic activities of daily living. The psychological and lifestyle ramifications of this daily, repetitive cycle of caffeine-induced spinal dehydration and subsequent pain are profound and often deeply unrecognized by the aging population, leading to a tragic, self-perpetuating downward spiral of deteriorating physical health and loss of vital independence. An elderly individual experiencing this severe morning back stiffness and pain naturally misinterprets the physical exhaustion and systemic lethargy generated by their disrupted sleep architecture and chronic pain as merely a symptom of aging or a lack of sufficient energy, prompting them to instinctively reach for even more caffeinated beverages in a desperate attempt to artificially boost their vitality and mask their discomfort. This increased consumption only serves to further intensify the systemic diuresis, compounding the hyperosmolarity of the blood, stripping even more essential moisture from the deeply parched intervertebral discs, and aggressively accelerating the irreversible structural breakdown formerly diagnosed as degenerative disc disease. As the structural integrity of the spine relentlessly deteriorates, the individual's mobility becomes increasingly restricted. They begin to naturally avoid physical activities, walking, gardening, or exercising out of a deeply ingrained fear of triggering further pain, a phenomenon clinically recognized as kinesiophobia. This sedentary behavior, directly rooted in the biomechanical failure of the spine, leads to rapid atrophy of the core musculature, specifically the multifidus, transversus abdominis, and erector spinae muscles, which are tasked with providing active dynamic stabilization to the vertebral column, leaving the fragile, dehydrated joints even more vulnerable to injury. Ultimately, the innocent habit of morning coffee consumption, completely devoid of proper concurrent hydration protocols, silently orchestrates the premature loss of an aging individual's physical independence, restricting them to a life of increasing disability, chronic pain management, reliance on heavy pharmaceutical analgesics, and potential surgical interventions that carry massive physiological risks in the elderly demographic. To break this insidious, devastating cycle and permanently reclaim the structural health of the aging spine, one must implement a profound yet incredibly accessible paradigm shift in morning nutritional behavior, centered entirely around the strategic, immediate replacement of the morning caffeine stimulant with a highly calculated intake of mineral-rich water, specifically designed to optimize intracellular and extracellular fluid balance. The human body does not merely require H2O to achieve functional systemic hydration. It requires a precise, biologically compatible matrix of water and essential electrolytes, particularly sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, to correctly govern the complex osmotic pressures that dictate fluid movement across semi-permeable cellular membranes. When an elderly individual delays their morning coffee for at least 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking, allowing the body's natural morning cortisol spike to organically elevate their alertness, and instead immediately consumes a large volume of high-quality, mineralized water, they initiate a profoundly restorative cascade of physiological events that directly counteracts the biomechanical vulnerabilities of the sleeping spine. The ingestion of water infused with an appropriate balance of minerals enters the digestive tract and is rapidly absorbed without initiating the aggressive diuretic response characteristic of caffeine, steadily rebuilding the circulating blood plasma volume that was inevitably lost through the natural physiological processes of overnight respiration and passive perspiration. Because this incoming hydration is rich in vital electrolytes, particularly sodium, which governs the volume of the extracellular fluid compartment, and potassium, which regulates the intracellular fluid environment via the continuous action of the ADP-dependent sodium-potassium pump, the newly expanded blood plasma remains perfectly isotonic, maintaining a balanced concentration of solutes that mirrors the ideal physiological state of a healthy human body. This immediate, strategic restoration of optimal blood plasma volume and precise systemic osmolarity creates a highly favorable, deeply therapeutic physiological environment that fundamentally rescues the intervertebral disc from the threat of hyperosmotic dehydration and mechanical collapse. As the richly oxygenated, heavily hydrated, and perfectly balanced arterial blood flows smoothly into the capillary beds adjacent to the cartilaginous end plates of the vertebrae, it creates a robust, positive osmotic pressure gradient that actively encourages the sustained, continuous diffusion of water deeply into the avascular core of the spinal disc. The immensely powerful glycosaminoglycans residing within the nucleus pulposus, particularly the chondroitin sulfate molecules, are freely permitted to bind with this abundant, newly available water, effectively locking the fluid molecules within their complex, negatively charged chemical structure. This profound rehydration process brilliantly restores the maximal hydrostatic pressure within the center of the disc, powerfully reinflating the nucleus pulposus so that it stands tall and fully pressurized, ready to aggressively counteract the immense vertical forces of gravity as the elderly individual rises from their bed and begins to move about their daily life. Because the central fluid core is once again capable of perfectly bearing the compressive loads of the torso, distributing the physical forces evenly outward into a gentle, uniform stretch of the surrounding tissues, the structural integrity of the annulus fibrosus is completely protected from the devastating, asymmetrical vertical shearing forces that previously caused microscopic tearing and chronic inflammation. Furthermore, the meticulously preserved vertical height of the newly rehydrated intervertebral disc ensures that the delicate spatial geometry of the entire spinal column remains geometrically flawless, maintaining wide, unobstructed neural foramina that allow the vital spinal nerve roots to exit the spinal cord freely without any threat of mechanical compression, thereby entirely preventing the agonizing, radiating electrical pain of sciatica from ever manifesting. Simultaneously, the restored disc height unloads the posterior facet joints, relieving them of the unnatural, crushing compressive forces that accelerate cartilage degeneration and bone spur formation, allowing these small, essential joints to articulate smoothly and painlessly as the individual bends, twists, and walks. The crucial inclusion of magnesium within the morning mineral water protocol further elevates this therapeutic intervention, as magnesium acts as a profound, natural biological calcium channel blocker, directly calming the hyperexcitability of the central nervous system and immediately reducing the spasticity and tension of the paraspinal muscles that constantly guard the injured spine. By profoundly relaxing the muscular corset surrounding the vertebral column, the spine is allowed to move with greater fluidity and less mechanical resistance, facilitating a more effective pumping action during normal walking that further enhances the osmotic imbibition of nutrients and water into the discs throughout the entire day. This comprehensive biomechanical restoration achieved simply through the strategic elimination of morning caffeine and the introduction of electrolyte-rich hydration represents a massive, highly empowering intervention for the elderly population, providing them with a highly effective, non-invasive, entirely accessible tool to actively halt the progression of degenerative disc disease, radically diminish chronic morning back pain, and fundamentally preserve the vital, life-sustaining physical independence that is necessary to enjoy their golden years with dignity, mobility, and profound systemic vitality. By deeply understanding the intricate, microscopic fluid dynamics of their own anatomy and respecting the devastating osmotic power of diuretic stimulants, aging individuals can successfully re-engineer their daily habits to work in perfect, harmonious synergy with their biology, ensuring that their spinal column remains a robust, well-hydrated pillar of strength for decades to come.